I've got two Traxxas products that I want to compare. This one is a Latrax Pre-Runner. This is a Slash 1/16. First, I want to try and give as good an idea as I can of this size difference. So here's what they look like head on. Alright, so here they are head on. There's a slight width difference. It's maybe like half an inch or so. The biggest difference in length is not so much the body. It's that the Slash has these bumpers that extend past the body. The Latrax has the bumpers behind the body. So that's a pretty big difference there. So let me take the bodies off and try to show what the chassis are like. There's not a huge difference in size. However, they're designed very, very differently. The Latrax is kind of a tray design, and everything basically sits on top of the tray, and then there's this longitudinal beam that kind of ties everything together and provides stiffness. The Slash is more of a tub shape. See, it's got a lot more height to the sides. And then while the Latrax is completely flat on the bottom, on the Slash, the bottom is how you access the drive shaft. And I think on the Latrax, you've got the battery on one side, and then on the other side you've got the motor, and then up here is the servo for the steering, and then on top of this plastic beam here you've got the receiver, and you've got the ESC, and then it ties into I guess they call these bulkheads, and then the differentials are in these ends, and then the suspension mounts to those pieces. Then you've got the kind of short bumpers. I've done one modification to the chassis. The bumper originally had, on each side, it had pieces that would tie into here, but you would have to remove those in order to open the differentials for repairs or for oiling, that kind of thing. So I cut this piece off, and it also lets this bend more for absorbing impact. Same deal with the front. Oh, and another thing you might notice is there's no front half shafts on the Latrax, because I stripped one of my differentials. So I stripped the rear one, so I just moved the front to the back. And then, yeah, let me show what this is like. The layout of this is it's very different. The motor is right in the middle, and it attaches to this gearbox. I guess this is the gearbox. This is also part of the gearbox. And then it has a drive shaft that goes forward, and it has one that goes back to each differential. There's no center differential in there, but you can buy one and put it in. So the front and rear axles are fixed relative to each other. Like on a real-life four-wheel drive truck, it would be if you put it into off-road four-wheel drive mode rather than all-wheel drive or something like that. And that's the case on both of these. The difference is that the Latrax does not have an available center differential. It just has that straight drive shaft that goes all the way through, and then the spur gear is on it, and so the motor has a little gear, and it drives a spur that's right under this. So it's only got those two gears that consist of its transmission. This has a lot more gears. I haven't taken it apart, but I've looked at videos on YouTube where people give instructions on switching gears out, things like that. It's got it's got the pinion, and then this seems to be, if you loosen the screw, you can adjust the motor, I think, with a screw that's behind this. And then it makes contact with the spur gear, which is in here, and then the power goes through a few more gears. And somewhere in there, there's a slipper clutch, so I guess it reduces chance of breaking the transmission or the motor from like if you come off a jump or something and you get impact through the drive line. And then you can see the drive shaft is behind this skid plate. There's actually two drive shafts. There's one going to the front of the vehicle and one going to the back of the vehicle. And if you have a center differential in there, it'll allow differential action between the front and the rear. The differentials on these two vehicles are very different. On this one, it just has like a little kind of a tub at each end, and the differential sits in it. And so it's not a sealed unit. So you can't really use a thicker oil or anything like that, because you've got the pinion gear and the spur gear on the differential all going through whatever you put in there. And it comes dry, actually. There's no oil at all, which I don't think is necessarily good. I put in some biodegradable chain oil for bicycle chains. I think it's made by Pedro's. Spelled change, CHAINJ, and it works well, and it's non-toxic. But when it leaks out, it'll biodegrade in the environment. It won't kill any fish or anything like that once it gets into the watershed. So the other thing is that the seal differentials on this actually come with thick oil in them, which gives a limited slip effect. And obviously it's not going to show in the video, but when I turn this, there is resistance. Actually, you can see because it doesn't keep spinning. So there's a thick oil in there, and I'm sure you can try different weights. It feels like it's the same weight of oil in the front and back. Let's see what else. The other thing I should show on these is that this has one battery bay on the left side, and on the other side is the motor, so there's no space for another battery. On the Slash, there are two battery slots. So it's got these little clips that it's hard to do with one hand. See, the door comes off of those little clips, and it's got that on both sides. There's another one on the side. And they say out of the box, put the battery in the left side for balance. But the thing is, it feels like it's exactly evenly weighted on both sides. So it's not like the right side is heavier and it needs the weight balance by the left. But I think if you put in two batteries for longer runtime or more power, the weight will be evenly distributed. On this one, it's the brushed version, and I've got the XL 2.5 ESC, which I believe can handle lithium polymer batteries as well. The servo on this is a lot bigger than the one on the Trax. Probably I don't know if you can really see. I bet it's twice as big. The motor is a lot bigger. It's ridiculously big. This is a massive unit, and it's got a fan built in too. It seems to run a lot cooler than that little one because it has that fan. The other big difference between these, besides the chassis, everything's different, but the suspension is very, very, very different. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. The Trax has a kind of suspension that a lot of other vehicles have, like especially buggies tend to have these kind of arms, which don't have steering built into the arm itself. See, I think it's the same front and rear. It's just, it has these hinges. So no steering happens there. The steering happens, well, first let me show what the upper link is like. It's just this simple rod. And so all of the twisting and back and forth is controlled by this big arm. It's kind of a trapezoidal arm, I guess. And then, of course, the steering is through these links. But the way it steers is it's got the arms attached to this kind of, it's not really a knuckle, it's a knuckle holder, and then the knuckle goes into that. So it's kind of a C-shaped thing, and then we've got that there. And it works fairly well. There's some play in it, though. And it's the same setup front and rear, I'm pretty sure. Except in the back, you don't have the mechanism that allows steering of the knuckle. Shocks and struts are directly mounted. Now, the Slash is dramatically different. It's got a similar design front and rear, but the components are different. So I'll show the front first. It has these wishbones. Wow. Rather than trapezoidal arms, it has wishbones, and the wishbones end in these little balls. And you've got that one there, and on top, rather than just a rod, you've got another wishbone, and it ends in that little ball. Oh, it's easier to show on this side, so you can see the ball in there. There's the ball. So steering, that allows, it's got, instead of having the two-piece, it just has the knuckle. That, I'm trying to find an angle where you can really see, and also get good light. And then what acts on that is the steering link on each side, which, connects through the servo through this series of, I think this is like a servo saver, and then it's got this link that connects to the servo. And so you've got front and rear motion controlled by two arms rather than one, and there's very little play in that. So I think this is a much better design, and it's more realistic. It's like what real trucks have, at least in the front. The antenna, it comes with a long tube that's like up to here. It's like a foot long. And you're supposed to stick it in this little hole and put a screw in there, a set screw, and it holds it in place. But I lost the set screw, and I don't really want that big antenna sticking out anyway, so I just used some electrical tape, which is getting dirty, and I just taped it there. It seems like the antenna is this metal part and then this little piece. Traxxas calls it a white tip, but it's silver, it's not a white. And the reason I believe this part is the antenna is people say you can't cut the wire to make it shorter, it just won't work. So I guess the wire must have some kind of shielding on it so it doesn't work as an antenna. Front bumper is pretty different design from the Latrax. The main attachment is through this loop, which I think is supposed to just allow flex and compress a little bit. And then there's a skid plate, which is separate from the bumper, which I think is interesting. And of course you've got the skid plates underneath. This one, just so you can see a little bit better. It doesn't really it is a skid plate. The whole thing is a skid plate, so it doesn't really need anything additional. Another interesting thing about this unit is not only does the 1/16 support 2 batteries, it also supports dual servos. So this is the original servo, and then it's got this slot here where you can put another one in. And the arm, this is the arm, the steering arm that's controlled by this servo. This moves this way through this rod, and then this rotates. This arm rotates like that. And so you put another servo on this side. The rear suspension has the same design as the front, so it's got the double wishbones. But if you had just those double wishbones, the wheels would steer willy-nilly. So you've got these additional links that are just fixed. So those act like the steering links, and they provide rotational, resistance. So I guess it's a multi-link system is what you would call this. It's not just double wishbones, it's multi-link. That's what they call them in the real car world. So yeah, that's hopefully that gives you a good idea. I've got upgraded rare dog bones in here. Oh, that's another thing. The Trax has these little dog bones, like a lot of vehicles do, where there's a little thing that rotates in that cup, and then on this side is a universal joint. And I've broken one of those. I don't think it's a very good design. It's a lot of stress on that little cup. On the 1/16th is actually, see it better on the front, is a thick, show this side, it's a fairly thick drive shaft with universal joints on both ends. So it doesn't have any dog bone. So it should be quite a bit stronger. The tires appear to be exactly the same. They're the same size and everything. The difference is that the Trax doesn't have foam in them, which is fine for that weight of the body, actually. The tire deforms a little bit and you get good traction. The Slash 1/16 has foam in the tires, and I think they actually put too much foam because you feel that that's fairly stiff. So this actually has, with the stock tires, less traction, on pavement at least, than the Trax. And I've heard of some people putting the Trax tires on that vehicle, on the 1/16th, but I have not tried it. But they say it works fine, and then I've also heard of people going the other way to use these foam-filled tires for higher speed. So you can interchange them to a certain extent. The other thing is that the suspension on the 1/16th is, I think, stock too soft. I'll show you what I mean by too soft. When it compresses, it stays compressed. The springs are not strong enough to overcome the friction of the tires on the table and pull it back up. The tires move in and out a little bit. The suspension cycles. And in driving, when you accelerate, the rear squats down and the front rises up. And then for a few seconds, once you get off the throttle, it stays squatting down and then gradually goes back up. So I think that the springs have a hard time overcoming the oil in the shocks. And also when you stare, it'll lean and it'll stay leaning once you straighten out. And then when you stare the other way, it'll lean the other way and it'll stay like that. This one, the Latrax, has exactly the right spring stiffness, I think. You compress it. Well, you compress it and it doesn't really go back up either. But in driving, it seems fine. Like, it doesn't stay squatting or anything like that. It's also better going off of jumps, because on this one, the suspension bottoms out when you hit a speed bump. This handles that a lot better. I think it may be that they used this inboard spring system, but they didn't, use springs that are stiff enough for that, because this multiplies the force of the spring by a lot. So this actually feels stiffer than that, but so that more suspension travel on the 1/16. The oil weight, I've got 30 weight oil in these shocks. That seems to make a little bit of difference, but it's really the springs that provide the springiness. The oil is just to prevent rebound. If you didn't have oil in your springs, or if you didn't have shock absorber, or if you didn't have oil in your shocks, you would go off a bump, land, and it would keep bouncing up and down. So it's really kind of like the oil is the opposite of the spring. The spring prevents compression. The oil reduces bounce back, and it also does reduce compression, but the purpose is to reduce the bounciness. So you can put in thicker oil in a vehicle, and it'll reduce, how much give the suspension has, but it doesn't increase the springiness. Once it's down, after you accelerate or whatever, it's going to make it harder for it to rise back up. So it doesn't help with things like that. Oil is for both directions of motion of the spring of the shock. For a good comparison of the bodies, I'm going to put this one on top of this one. It's only about an inch bigger. I think this looks way cooler. Look at the neon. Alright folks, I've had both of these trucks for a while now. I've had the 1/16th for a couple weeks, so I've done quite a bit of driving and repairing and things like that. So I've got some decent insights into the pros and cons of these two vehicles. I've actually been surprised by some things. Both of these vehicles are too powerful for the platforms. What I mean is that if you use training mode, I think you'll be fine. You'll have a lot of fun. I think training mode is optimal for both of these. I think you get about 10 or 15 miles an hour out of training mode on the Latrax, and a little over 15 miles an hour on the 1/16th. But using full power mode, I think, puts too much power into the drivetrains of these vehicles, at least on pavement. If you're sticking to loose surfaces, it might be fine. But on the Latrax, I had stripped out the spur gear, which is the one that is driven directly by the motor. So I had to replace that. So I had to replace that with the steel one. The Slash 1/16th, I've mostly been driving in training mode, but I actually put in a center differential, and then I was making a video to show how that performs differently, and so I tried it out in full speed mode, and one thing I realized is that it just flips over. When you're using full throttle and you try to steer, it'll flip over. So you can modulate your throttle, but of course a lot of RC vehicles don't have a training mode, so you have to manually adjust your throttle. But I tend to go full throttle, whenever I can, and then I get in trouble. So The other thing is that it's right after that full throttle run, just for less than a minute, I ended up with a clicking noise in my differentials, and it sounds like it's both the front and the rear diff. So I really don't think the drivetrain on this vehicle can handle the power of that massive brushed motor, the Titan 550. It's just too much power for it, too much torque, and this is the motor that they use in the 1/10 scale vehicles anyway, so there really is a lot of power for the vehicle. I think you're better off using the training mode, where it's proportionally the right amount of power and you get the right kind of scale driving experience. Going full throttle with the training mode, it drives and it looks and it feels like a trophy truck. If you watch videos of those races like the Baja 1000 and the Mid 400, you will, I think, get what I'm saying. There's a certain look, and you can kind of get a sense of how those vehicles feel to drive. And this, I think, is an accurate representation of that driving experience in training mode. And I think this is also a fairly accurate representation. It kind of handles a bit more like a sports car, because it's got a lower center of gravity. The motor on this is mounted up high, so it rolls a lot in turns, which is just like the real trophy trucks and trick trucks. This feels more like a sports car. Another thing is that it's kind of hard to find alternate bodies for these vehicles. For some reason, there's a lot of options in the 1/10 scale, but not so much in this, 1/16. This has a 210 millimeter wheelbase, and this is a little bit less than 200 millimeter. So there are bodies that have the right wheelbase, but they're usually like muscle cars and sports cars and things like that. There are fewer options as far as trucks go. But what I did is actually got a second body, and I painted it with this color called Spiced Amber, made by Krylon. It's one of their fusion paints, and it's like a satin finish. So that's actually why I painted both the outside and the inside to get that satin. Now this stuff just, when you scrape it, it just comes off. So I think it still looks fine. It also tends to flake when at the stress points, it flakes off. So, even if you did just the inside of the body, it would end up flaking off. So probably paint made for RC vehicles is the way to go. One big difference between these is in durability. The 1/16 is much more durable. It's a stronger chassis. It's better designed. It's got those A-arms. It's a more advanced design, and it's actually more advanced in a lot of ways than the 1/10 models, which use that trapezoidal link with the symbol rod up at the top of the suspension setup, whereas this has dual wishbones all around. And then, in general, it's just a stronger chassis, a larger motor with the fan, so it doesn't get so hot, so it should last longer. The differentials and everything are bigger. However, the Latrax is a lot easier to work on. With the Latrax, to get to the spur gear and the pinion, it's just this little thing you take off, and it's exposed. And then to get to the differential, there's a lot of screws that have to come off. You have to take off this whole assembly, and then you have to take these screws out. If you have this bumper, like it comes stock with little arms that go to the chassis, you have to remove those as well, but actually cut those off just to make it easier to access the differentials. But it's still easy. These shocks just pop right off, So it's pretty easy to work on. Everything's pretty simple. It's laid out pretty simply. It's not as simple as I would like. You know, a lot of it is kind of woven together. You have to remove one thing to get to another thing. And it's all from the top, and there's no access at the bottom. So it is easier than the 1/16th, which there's this access below. There's the skid plate that goes the length of the vehicle almost, or the length of the middle part of the chassis, and then there are these pieces, these skid plates that cover the steering and then the rear differential and all that stuff. But to get to these differentials, I haven't actually done it, even though I need to, because I've got clicking noises in both differentials now. You have to remove not just pieces at the ends. You have to remove, first of all, the suspension, so that you can take these arms off. You have to remove the motor, then you have to remove the transmission, then you have to remove the skid plate, and then you have to unscrew a bunch of screws in here and pull the front assembly off, and it's the same thing on the rear. You have to remove a bunch of screws, you know, remove the suspension, and then pull the whole assembly off. It's just really complex process, and you can find a bunch of videos on YouTube of people showing how to do this, or maybe not a bunch. You can find a few. And it's like, why did they make it so complex to work on? Like, I understand, you know, it's a relatively small platform, but they could have made it so that the differential was a separate piece that, you know, you can maybe remove the arms and then you can get to the differential and have it pop out. But they wanted to integrate everything, I guess. And so the differential housing is a structural piece, and the shock tower, or the body posts and the bumper mount to the differential, which I think is a cause of a lot of issues with these vehicles, because the differentials need shimming and all kinds of weird stuff like that. Real trucks are not like that. The differential in a real vehicle, in a real truck, a race truck or a sports car or whatever, is a separate piece that you unbolt and it comes out, because they want to minimize how much time their mechanics have to spend on maintenance. So, you know, it is what it is. It's still a good platform. I think it'll just take you a long time to do anything. I put in a center differential, which goes essentially in here. The transmission's right there, and then you have to remove the motor. Then in order to get the transmission out, you have to remove this plate, which requires removing this plate, and then you undo some screws and it lifts out, and then you can swap the standard. It's kind of like just a gear that has shafts going front and rear for the drive shafts, and so you swap that for a center differential. But it took about an hour, I think, to do it the first time. So, and that's a fraction of what it would take to do the differentials. And the differential is something you're always going to have to work on. You're always going to have to repair and replace and oil and that kind of thing. On this, it's a lot easier. You take off some screws and remove a few pieces, and you're in there. The first part that I broke on the Latrax, actually didn't really break them, but I twisted the axle shafts, and that's really because I converted it to rear drive to make it more fun. So those ended up kind of twisting under the torque. So I just replaced those with the metal ones, and then I broke one of my cups on here, the drive cups that the little dog bone goes into. So I'm running it in rear drive again, and then I'd also stripped out the spur gear. It's just plastic, and so I replaced it with a metal one. And other than that, the servo is it's fine, even after a lot of crashing and flipping and that kind of thing. I think the Servo Saber does a good job, but it does make the steering wander. Like, you'll be driving along and all of a sudden it's steering to the right, so you have to adjust the trim, and then it's steering to the left, you have to adjust the trim again. But overall, it works all right. On the 116th, the one thing, or the first thing that I broke was the steering servo. So I did a glancing blow off of a wall. I didn't crash head on, but I was staring, and I think that's probably why it damaged the servo, because of the staring. I think it somehow puts more stress on there when you're staring, when you have an impact. So I was staring to avoid a wall, but I didn't stare enough, or maybe the vehicle, that it didn't have enough of a tight turning radius, so it hit the wall. And then after that, it would, when I would stare to the left, I believe the servo would stick, and it would make this kind of bumblebee noise. So I replaced the stock servo with this Savox. It's the model is 250 MG, or I think 0250 MG, and it slots right in, and then you have to reverse the steering on the transmitter. And the way you do that is you hold down this, or you switch it on, you hold down this red button, and then it starts blinking, this light starts blinking green, and then you turn to one side, and then you press that button again, you release it, and then it's reprogrammed to be reverse steering. So for some reason this is wired opposite from the stock one. Now, as soon as I ran it in full speed mode, this vehicle developed a ticking sound in the differential. So once again, I think these vehicles are better in training mode. You can use full throttle, you get better throttle modulation, and the scale is correct for, I think, the scale is correct to make these feel like real vehicles. Full power is just too much. You have traction issues, flipping issues, and you damage your differentials, within seconds. Not even a minute I was using the full speed mode, and I damaged both my differentials. And that's also how I had damaged the spur gear on this, by using full speed mode. It's also how I damaged one of my dog bones, or my dog bone cups, by using full speed mode. I don't really see the point in full speed, full throttle. It doesn't make the cars any more fun. It just means you need more space to drive them. And I can see if you're doing speed runs, you want to see how fast the vehicles go, you would do that. But in actual driving, where you're dealing with a limited amount of space in a relatively small vehicle, you want to see how it drives, how the suspension moves over bumps, how it can oversteer, understeer. You can't really do that with the full speed. It's just too fast. But with the training mode, you get more of a scale experience, and to me, that's way more fun. I'm not really a fan of the rock crawler type vehicles where you're really going slow and kind of recreating a real life rock crawling experience. But I like this kind of vehicle at a moderate speed. But overall, the track's easier to work on, a little bit cheaper. With both of these, you're going to have to spend $30 or $40 on an AC charger. You'll probably have to replace parts like that servo. Even if you don't use full speed mode, you'll have to replace some parts from the brake. On the 1/16th, you'll have to replace the tires pretty often. In a couple weeks, I wore through my front tires for some reason, and so I've got some HPI street tires on there now. You can use any kind of 1.9 inch wheels, maybe 1.7, but I haven't tried 1.7 yet. But yeah, tires are going to be a cost with these. Parts are going to be a cost. Overall, this I think makes more sense to buy. It's more durable. It is more effort to work on, so maybe this is better for kids or youths starting out in RC. they won't get too frustrated working on this, trying to, watch YouTube videos and figure out how to do things. It's also a lot lighter. It's probably at least half the weight, maybe even 1/3 of the weight. And you can look those specs up. I don't have them, offhand, but a lot lighter, so there's less damage when you crash. And this one, I let the kids at my apartments drive it, and they've done a lot of crashing, and they haven't broken anything. I just kind of bounced this one off the wall and damaged the steering servo, and so I think the weight is a factor in that kind of thing. It's more durable, but it does weigh more, so that's something to take into account. Springs for both of these, you're going to have a hard time finding upgrade springs. This 1/16 for the dual batteries needs stiffer springs. I haven't found stiffer ones that work well in the rear. Up front, I've got some Atomic RC springs, the purple ones, and if you search on Amazon, you will find these, and then you can also find Integy ones. The Integy are just too stiff. You just get full suspension height and no down travel, and very little suspension. When you go over bumps, it's fine. It absorbs energy. But for driving along, you don't get that scale trophy truck experience where you're just floating over the bumps. You get more of a stiffer traditional RC experience. This, I haven't really looked into upgrade springs, but the stock ones are the right stiffness. Could use maybe more height, but I'd say it's fine stock. It handles really well. But overall, this makes more sense. Just spend the extra $80. You get a car charger that you can use, whereas the stock charger with the tracks is totally useless. It should just go in the trash. So the Slash 1/16 is my recommendation. I would only choose the Latrax, for kids. So overall, I would spend the extra money for the 1/16, and I would also not choose any of the other 1/16 models, because I think this is the Slash is the one that looks like a real truck. It drives like a real trophy truck. It's going to be way more fun. What's the point of getting an RC car that just looks and drives like an RC car, like the E-Revo and all those ones? I don't really get it. Realistic is fun. I would get the Latrax for a kid who's going to be better off with the lower speed and greater ease of maintenance and parts replacement and things like that. It's still a pretty quick car, and it's fairly durable. One other reason to get the Latrax would be this awesome paint job it comes with. The neon colors look really cool, and it has kind of a retro early 90s look. These are stock is this black and red. It's like it's trying to look badass. It's just an RC car. That's why I went with this kind of bright flat orange. I think it looks cool. It's still not as cool as this. That neon is amazing.